you want to turn your camera off before we go live? Okay. And we're live now. We're live now, Kenneth, so you can kick us off.
Alrighty. Good evening, everyone, and thank you all so much for joining us today for our People's Hearing on Climate Justice in Virginia. This event was organized by Appalachian Voices, the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, New Virginia Majority, Progress Virginia, the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative, and Virginia Organizing. And so we are going to get started today at about 6:05. And so just in the meantime, we will have some music playing, but feel free to leave comments in the Facebook live chat. Just let us know who you are and which part of Virginia you're in. You're in. Hi, everyone. Again, if you are just joining us, we are going to get started in just a few minutes. While you are waiting, feel free to leave your name in the comment box. Just introduce yourself. Let us know who you are and what part of Virginia you're in.
Good workers, this year is our time. Now these folks in Washington carry what's on our minds. Come on, voters, let's all work next time. So which side are you on now? Which side are you on? Which side are you on now? Which side are you on? Which side are you on now? Which side are you on?
Hi, everyone, again. This is Kenneth William. If you are just joining us, we are going to get started in just a few minutes. While we are waiting, feel free to put your name in the comment box, but also let us know what part of Virginia that you're in. Well, all right, everyone. Well, we are going to go ahead and get started. So again, if you are just joining us, thank you all again for joining us this evening for our people's hearing on climate justice in Virginia. This event today was organized by a number of organizations, including Progress Virginia, Appalachian Voices, Chesapeake Climate Action Network, New Virginia Majority, the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative, and Virginia Organizing. And so today's purpose of our event today is quite simple. Earlier this year, during the, particularly last year, my apologies, during the 2020 regular session, Virginia, we were able to adopt environmental justice policies in our state that we believe that started to move the needle forward on a commitment to racial and economic justice here in Virginia. However, low-income families and Black and Brown communities across the state continue to grapple with environmental injustices and the environmental and the economic and social implications of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so there remains an urgent need for our state legislature, state officials, and agencies across the Commonwealth to continue to strengthen the laws so that environmental justice can be realized for all Virginians here in our Commonwealth. And we believe that in order for us to do that, that communities most impacted must be at the center of any policy proposals here in Virginia, and particularly those that are folks that are Black, Indigenous, people of color, and working class communities throughout the Commonwealth. So today, we will hear stories and testimonies from 5 speakers today from across Virginia. And they will tell you their stories and their ask for our state lawmakers for this upcoming General Assembly session that begins on January 13th. We will give you a brief overview of what our legislative priorities are for the upcoming session. But also we'll have an opportunity at the very end for any questions, and then we'll close our day. So we will, so again, thank you all so much for joining us today. And I will like to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker today, her name is Irene Leach. She is a professor of consumer studies at Virginia Tech and the president of the Virginia Citizens Consumer Council. And she will discuss the impact of both the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and the Mountain Valley Pipeline and the land on the land that she owns. And so without further ado, I'd like to welcome today Irene.
Thank you. I've learned the hard way that when a interstate gas pipeline decides that it wants your property, you don't have a lot of options. And they don't have to pay a lot of attention to what you want. It's been a real battle. My family farm, which we've operated for over 100 years, is in the geographic center of Virginia. And the Atlantic Coast Pipeline was scheduled to go right through the middle of our property. They insisted that the fields that we used the most were the ones that they had to go through the middle of. That pipeline was scheduled to go through rural communities that mostly they didn't expect to have problems with. For most of us, our land is our single largest asset. And they give you some money, but they don't do anything that would replace the time that you'll need to spend, the danger that you'll be exposed to because of the way they do the safety for environment, as well as explosions. And if you choose to fight it, it can be thousands of dollars to get the experts and so forth, which means that a lot of people just accept what the pipeline offers and go on. And this affects the value of their property forever. Behind me, you see the Mountain Valley Pipeline coming across Fort Lewis Mountain. This is what I look out of my bedroom window and see every morning when I get up. The pipeline that's to where it's to my right isn't in the ground yet. At the very top, and they put it in December several years ago in the snow and the rain. We're having all kinds of problems with runoff, sedimentation, and it's not even complete. And we've learned that it's really hard to get enforcement of the laws that are supposed to protect our water and our soil. And so as a landowner, I have learned that it's very, very hard to protect your single largest asset when a pipeline comes knocking.
Thank you so much for sharing your story today. We really appreciate it, and all the work that you have done here in Virginia as well on this issue. Now I would like to invite our second speaker. Her name is Tasha Devon of Wise County, and also the Southern Appalachian Mountain Stewards. She will speak about just transition principles and the impact of power plant closures on communities. And she also serves as a member of the Virginia Council on Environmental Justice. Please help me in welcoming our next speaker, Tasha.
Hi, Moreweka. Thank you, everybody, for having me, and for everybody who organized this event. I am thankful to speak about a just transition and an issue that we're facing in Southwest Virginia at this point. I want to start off by saying that we're doing good in Virginia. Like, we're moving forward, right? We have solar legislation that's being passed. We passed the Clean Energy Economy Act. We passed the Environmental Justice Act, which codified the Virginia Council on Environmental Justice. And these are all wins. But we also need to be mindful that as we make this switch to a clean energy economy, that we don't recreate the disparities in a changing economy that we've seen in the past. The burden or the cost of an energy transition should not fall upon the already impacted communities. And I want to say that again, that the burden or cost of a transition should not fall upon the already impacted communities. We suffered enough. And I think that this particular principle is going to be the crux of what I'm going to explain in the story or in the example that I give later on. So in our region, it's coal country. Very proud to be coal miners, very proud to have powered this country for so many decades. And we have hopes to continue to be an energy generator region. But, you know, coal mining is back-breaking work. It was also lung-breaking work. And to honor the sacrifice that these people have made, we really need to be included when it comes to the information, when it comes to the processes, when it comes to the solutions and decision-making around what a transition looks like, what an energy transition in our region looks like. So with that being said, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Virginia City Hybrid Energy Center, which is a coal burning power plant located just right outside of St. Paul, which is also known as Virginia City. It provides 153 full-time employee positions and hundreds of supporting jobs in the surrounding community. It also generates millions of revenue and tax. And this was obviously a really big selling point when they had proposed this site for the plant. And this was about 10 years ago. So it was before my time at Southern Appalachian Mountain Stewards, or SAMS as we call it. But we definitely have some veteran members who were there and who were arrested in protest of this plant. So we fought the good fight, tried to bring awareness, but it was built. And since the plant has been built, there has been violations and issues of these violations for carbon monoxide, particulate matter, sulfur dioxide. And at this point, that is just what we know. That is just the things that we have been told. And we also know that with the Clean Energy Economy Act, that most of these plants will be retired by 2055. What we did not know, and this is where things get a little sticky here. What we did not know is that there was a report put out by Dominion, and we would not have known or seen this report either had there not been some other things going on. But we got a report that was publicized about how the plant is underperforming. It's not just underperforming, but since it's underperforming, it costs our ratepayers more to subsidize that plant. So when we found out about this, there were interviewers or reporters who asked Dominion, why did they not want us to see the report? Why did they not want the public and local officials to see this report? And they had said there was a couple of reasons. One, they felt that the public could not understand the report without context, and they felt that it would cause unnecessary panic. And again, this is all referenced in that article by Appalachian Voices. And I just felt like that was incredibly insulting to the people of Wise County, to the folks in these communities. I also felt like that's information that our local representatives and our local representation deserve to know, because that's what we do. We have processes and procedures for people to make decisions on our behalf. And the only way they can do that is if they have the information that is vital for them to do so. And it's their duty to serve us in that way. And I don't think an energy company has the right or the ability to take that power away from us. That's our power, and it's us, and it's the people. So they're poisoning us, we're paying for it, and they didn't want us to know about it. So with that also being said, I want to say that I would put into support of any legislation that encourages our state or local and I would encourage our state and local representatives to support any legislation that explicitly calls for transparency, regular studies, and regular reporting to local municipalities, to related agencies by all energy generating facilities. And on top of that, to call for serious reinvestment by these energy companies into the communities that they have already impacted and are continuing to impact. And I feel like if we do these two things, then we can say that we're working in a just transition framework in Southwest Virginia. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony, in which you shared is really very important and very vital. And I think that one of the key things that are really connected with, as you were talking, is this idea that as Virginia continues to make strides and making improvements in our environmental justice here in Virginia, that communities that have been historically impacted by environmental injustice should not hold the burden as we are trying to think through as a state and also as localities about how we move forward with a clean and equitable economy, but also new policies here in the Commonwealth. So I really appreciate that. If you are just joining us today, again, thank you so much. If you have not done so already, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat online, but also let us know where you're from. Again, I know there are some new folks that just joined, but thank you for joining today's People's Hearing on Climate Justice in Virginia. Again, this event today is being organized by Appalachian Voices, the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, New Virginia Majority, Progress Virginia, the Environmental Justice Collaborative, as well as Virginia Organizing. And so now I would like to invite our third speaker. Our third speaker today is Adam Millay of Wise County, and he will speak today about the impact of power plant closures. And so I would like to now welcome Adam to give us his testimony.
Hello. Hello, good evening, and thank you for your time hearing our stories and for the opportunity to tell them in this forum, to tell them in this forum that can really make a difference in Southwest Virginia and throughout the state. My name is Adam Millay. I am a former treasurer and administrator for the grassroots community-led organization Southern Appalachian Mountain Stewards, and continue to serve with them as a member volunteer today. I am also a lifelong community member of Southwest Virginia. I was raised in Lee County, watching my family and my friends and my neighbors sacrifice their health, lungs, backs, and countless hours of their lives in service to the profits of a dying coal industry. They serve that industry with pride, and many of them, including my brother, still do today. I can remember a time when I was 11 years old it was part of our routine to walk down to my mama's house and dig up a couple of 5-gallon buckets of coal out of a pile next to her driveway to make sure she had heat going for the night in her cast iron stove. She would slip us $2 for our efforts. Today, when I smell coal burning in the winter air, it brings back nostalgia for that time, even though I know that scent is filled with a toxic history of exploitation, labor abuse, greed, racism, poverty, and environmental devastation that continues today. My road to speaking to you here today really begins when I was permanently paralyzed after falling out of a tree when I was 13 years old, witnessing an entire community come together for one person, me, so that I could have the chance at an independent, fulfilling, and productive life changed my entire outlook on the world. I felt called to serve my community in whatever capacity I could in order to change and protect even the smallest bit of the world if it was possible. In 2003, I moved to Big Stone Gap and to attend UVA-Wise for my degree in business. While there, I was approached by members of Southern Appalachian Mountain Stewards about this little coal plant that was being proposed for our community, and the incredible promises that were being made in order to get its approval. Having stepped my toes slightly into activism at the time, I had a fair understanding of these promises or a fair understanding that these promises are rarely kept and always overstated. We knew even in 2008 that the millions of dollars in tax revenue, overstated green attributes, and efficiencies they were trying to sell us on was little more than greenwashing. Dominion was taking advantage of our community's desperation and poverty, expecting that we would not have the power to say no. I felt compelled to protect my community by joining the effort to stop this plant from ever being built. While we did not succeed in that effort, we did succeed in forcing higher emission and pollution standards on this plant. Fast forward to today, this plant has unfortunately lived up to the expectations that led us to oppose its construction in the first place. Our communities took on debt to build schools and infrastructure based on the lofty promises of revenue that never came at the level Dominion claimed. The plant has racked up pollution violations that put our lives and our communities at risk and have certainly contributed to the degradation of our health. Now, with this plant's operation unviable long-term, running at a fraction of its capacity and contributing a fraction of the revenue that we were promised, we are now facing with losing this little support we get from it. I feel the least they can do, the least that these legislators can do, that are there to serve the best interests of Virginians, is to require the transparency necessary for us to prepare as much as we possibly can for the inevitable shutdown of these plants. The Virginia Clean Economy Act requires AEP and Dominion to shut down their fossil fuel plants by 2050. When that happens, Wise County will lose 15% of our tax revenue. I'm sure the story is similarly repeated in other communities saddled with these plants as well. We already know many of them are going to be shut down early. The Wise County, the Hybrid Energy Center is no exception. And the only reason we know that is because of disclosures from the Attorney General's office that Dominion attempted to hide from our view. We implore the state to support HB 1834, which will allow for us to prepare our communities without having to rely on the hopes and good faith of an industry that we have been given no reason to trust. This bill and its forthcoming Senate counterparts would require carbon emitting electricity generating plants to submit publicly and to appropriate agencies a facility retirement study every 18 months, as well as require disclosure of closure plans within 14 days of making the decision, giving workers and communities impacted crucial time to prepare and make arrangements for the loss of revenue, jobs, and livelihood. This type of disclosure will be vital to our community's ability to fulfill the void being left behind. If we are truly going to have a just transition in the Commonwealth, this the state needs to step up and fill their responsibility to support impacted communities and people. This legislation is a small step in fulfilling that obligation. And thank you for your time and for hearing our stories.
Adam, thank you so much for telling your story, but also your continued advocacy work, particularly in Southwest Virginia. And I think your story directly connects to some of the comments and testimony that Tasha already also provided as well, is that as we think about how our state transitions to a clean economy, or also thinking about places in our Commonwealth that had traditionally relied on the coal industry to fuel their economy, how do we make sure that as our state continues to transition from coal power energy to now clean energy, how do we make sure that communities that are directly impacted are involved in that conversation, and that making sure that the process is also transparent, and also there is also a level of accountability. So again, thank you so much for telling your story. Next, I would like to invite our next speaker. Our next speaker today is Ebony Guy. Ebony is a member of the Danville chapter and state governing board member of Virginia Organizing. Ebony will talk about the struggle for many in our communities to pay artificially inflated bills from utility monopolies and the gross overcharges from Dominion Power over the past years. And so please help me in welcoming Ebony.
Hi, thank you for the introduction and Happy New Year to everyone. As mentioned, my name is Ebony Guy, and I am representing Southside Virginia as a member of Virginia Organizing and as a member of the State Governing Board. We at Virginia Organizing stand with the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus in saying that racism is a national health crisis. And why do I say that? During this pandemic, we have noticed that COVID-19 disproportionately impacts Black people and people of color. And I mention that because we don't have access to certain things, healthcare resources and things of the like. And what is also included in those resources is utilities. What we're facing here in Southside Virginia and other areas is utility insecurity. I don't know the technical term for it, but we'll call it utility insecurity. Prior to the moratorium set forth by Governor Northam, 400 families in the city of Danville went without utilities. And that's one too many families that we're dealing with. And to paint a picture for people of Southside Virginia, my hometown of Halifax County and the city of Danville are two of the areas I concentrate in. So I include that in Southside Virginia, also Martinsville, Pennsylvania County, and other communities. We, according to the last census data, have the largest population of Black people. In the city of Danville, close to 8,000 people have benefited from Medicaid expansion, and we're at 21% poverty. So when we're looking at what's happening nationwide, we know that we're going to face a tougher battle when it comes to dealing with the snowball effect, if you will, of what's happening around COVID. As far as utilities, the city of Danville, like Dominion and other utility companies across the Commonwealth, they're a monopoly. We don't have other competition here in the city of Danville, so we're forced to pay ridiculous rates. They get to kind of charge their utilities as they see fit, and we really don't have any recourse when it comes to outsourcing our utilities. So when you go back to the 400 families that went without utilities. You're thinking about 400 families who didn't have access to healthy food, people who did not have access to the internet, people who did not have access to other resources, or they were forced to move in with other family members, creating more of a possible super spreader event with the impacts of COVID. And there is data available that starkly indicates that people who do not have utilities are more likely to get sick with COVID-19 or to have other illnesses. So again, we stand with the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus because we know how this disease and utility insecurity affects Black people and people of color. And I'm calling on Governor Northam, Danny Marshall, Frank Ruff, James Edmonds, and Bill Stanley to look at legislation that will protect consumers, protect residents. They're not consumers. They are residents. These are human beings that we're talking about. These are human lives that we are discussing. It shouldn't take an act of God to tell people that making sure that people in their hometowns have access to utilities. But until we get to a better point where people kind of look at themselves and have more moral fiber to understand that utilities are a necessity and it's not a monopoly, we have to call on the governor and our state legislators to ensure that these human beings have access to utilities and that they're not paying ridiculous rates or turn-on fees or things like that. So we stand with them, and hopefully with this with new legislative season coming up here, that we can have some solid information, some solid access for people to have utilities and have more security in their homes. Thank you.
Ebony, thank you so much again for giving your testimony and talking about the need, particularly as we are in the COVID-19 pandemic, to make sure that as we are continuing as a state to this work, to realize the need to make sure that we hold utility monopolies like Dominion Energy accountable for things like over earnings and overcharging ratepayers across the Commonwealth. So thank you again so much for your testimony and the work that you continue to do in your community in Southside Virginia. So thank you so much. And so now I would like to invite our next speaker. Our next speaker today is Carl Poole of Norfolk. And he is also a core leader of New Virginia Majority. And today, Carl will talk about the impact of the coal industry on the health of nearby neighborhoods and the disproportionate impact on Black, Brown, and low-income communities. And so now I would like to invite Carl to give his testimony.
How's it going this evening? Like I said, my name is Carl Poole, and I'm a member of New Virginia Majority, Lambert's Point chapter for climate justice. I want to start by relaying to you my experience that first got me involved with the chapter here in Norfolk. A few years ago, I worked for a water treatment plant in Norfolk, Virginia. The water treatment plant where it's situated is between the Norfolk Southern Rail Yards and a historically Black subdivision called Lambert's Point. Now, I walked to work. It didn't take that long, maybe 15, 20 minutes from where I lived to where the water treatment plant was at. But the one thing that I noticed just walking the length of the neighborhood of Lambert's Point was how dirty everyone's house was. I don't mean like everything was old houses or poorly built houses or run down where that area was at. It's just, there was just like this black soot everywhere. You noticed it a whole lot when it rained, on people's awnings, on light colored houses, on people's cars and window seals. Everything was just dirty. Took me a few weeks to finally have it click through my head though. Where I worked at the main gate of the water treatment plant, the awning was just as dirty above where I worked. If you put your hand on the windows and put your hand across the window, you had just black soot on your hand. Where I worked at was maybe 30, 40 yards away from the rail yards, where at least 4 or 5 times a day, there were trains pulling dozens upon dozens of coal cars in and out of the yard. they weren't covered. So it didn't take long to realize, yeah, this whole neighborhood seems to be inundated from the coal dust coming off of these cars. Lambert's Point is a neighborhood that's situated not just between where this rail yard is at, but it's two affluent neighborhoods, one to the north of it, one to the south of it, and it's adjacent to State College, Old Dominion University. When you have a Black and brown and poor neighborhood, you're going to find that in addition to just being maybe more economically vulnerable, the same cues make it environmentally vulnerable, whether you're talking about climate, whether you're talking about ocean level rise or just coal dust from your local rail yard. Politically speaking, the voices there aren't going to be heard as easily. They're going to have to be louder about it if they catch the attention of anyone in the first place. You got to understand that rail yard's been there for more than a century. It bears the same name as the city. So when city officials are going to listen to voices coming out of that, when state officials are looking for voices that are coming out about any issues with coal dust in the area, are they going to listen to the company that bears their name, or are they going to listen to one individual neighborhood that just might not happen to have the political influence of, a corporate company? Now, I started becoming involved with New Virginia Majority in the chapter and with when I began hearing from other folks that lived in that neighborhood. People who raise kids in the neighborhood who talk about the asthma and the respiratory problems their children had since birth. People that started talking about how they can't trust what they grow in gardens around their area because they don't know what's in the soil. And when you still have VEQ who is paying at times Norfolk Southern and companies like it to regulate themselves, to test their own air quality, to test their own water quality around them. It's like you're asking the folks who are suspect at putting people at risk to police themselves. That's what got me involved. That's what got me started, is to jump in and do something. Because when you have Black and brown and poor communities, you got to raise your voice a whole lot more. You got to get noticed. You have to not only do it on the local level, go downtown in front of corporate offices and make some noise. You got to go to Richmond and do the same thing. That's the plight I know that we deal with right where we're at. And even in the neighborhood I live at in Norfolk, I live maybe 9 or 10 blocks from where those coal cars run back and forth daily. And as much as the expense, the little the expense it might be to cover those coal cars, to minimize any sort of risk of that coal dust coming off of them, it's still a fight to get Norfolk Southern to do just that. To this day, they don't cover their coal cars. I hear them or watch them drive past my neighborhood or past Lambert's Point almost every time I'm walking in the neighborhood. That's the fight. Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Carl, so much for the work that you continue to do for members of the Norfolk community, as well as the work that you have done as part of New Virginia Majority. We greatly appreciate it. And so today, we're able to hear from 5 great speakers from different parts of the state. We were able to hear a little bit about the impact of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, the Mountain Valley Pipeline on folks across the state and also communities. We learned a little bit about the idea of just transition principles and what does that really mean. We also learned about the impact of power plant closures on communities throughout the Commonwealth. We discussed a little bit about the importance of holding utility monopolies accountable, like Dominion Energy. But we also discussed the impact of the coal industry on the health of Black and brown and low-income communities in Norfolk, Virginia. And so if anyone that's here with us live, if you would like to share your story or a story, please feel free to do so in the chat. And so one of the things that really resonated with me from Carl's testimony was this idea that if you really want to continue to make change, particularly as our lawmakers are coming back to Richmond for the General Assembly or virtually, that is the legislative session is a key opportunity for engagement. This year, our General Assembly will kick off the legislative session on January 13th. And if you want to learn more about how to follow along the process, we can leave a link in the Facebook chat as well, so you can learn more about when committees will be heard. If you want to learn a little bit about what bills your lawmakers will also be hearing, we will put information about that in the link. And so earlier I mentioned the names of all the different organizations that are part of this work. And we have been working together now for over a year, and really looking forward to making change and making some improvements and building upon what we were able to win during the last legislative session. And for us, some of our key legislative priorities are: one, making sure that we can amend the Virginia Environmental Justice Act that passed in 2020 to make sure that we can codify the important interagency working groups, in making sure that all state agencies create environmental justice policies, including the impact that it has on its communities. Additionally, we will be focusing on legislation that will hold utility monopolies like Dominion Energy accountable. For example, passing legislation that will require 100% of utility over earnings to be refunded back to customers. And as folks are keenly aware, the COVID-19 pandemic and the recession has impacted the lives of folks across our Commonwealth. And I think that one thing that can help Virginia families in making sure that we can get their money back in their pockets so they can keep their lights on, take care of their families. And so that is critically important. And lastly, going back to some of the conversations that both Adam and Daisha shared, we will also be working on legislation that would require utilities to provide a schedule of power plant closures to impact the communities, workers, as well as state agencies. And so I will pause here now and turn it over to other colleagues that take any questions from members in the audience or members of the media.
Hey everyone, I'm Ashley Crocker. I'm the Communications Director at Progress Virginia. So if there are any reporters on the line who have a question, I invite you to unmute yourself and ask your question now. And we're also happy to take questions from community members who are participating on Facebook. Just put your question in the chat and we will get to it. I know that I saw a couple questions already, so we'll start with that one. Is there any legislation to require investment in retraining or community support from the power generation companies? Kenneth or maybe Tanisha, do you want to take that?
I'm sure. I'm happy to jump in really quickly. Right now, I am unsure if there is any bills that will be heard during this session that will do that. I know right now we are actively reviewing bills. Many of the bills that members of the legislature plan on carrying, they are not publicly available just yet. But after this question, I will put in the Facebook live chat a website that everyone can go to if you want to see what bills are filed, what bills your lawmakers are carrying. And so to answer your question, unsure just yet, but we will know in the coming days as more bills are filed and publicly available. And if there are any colleagues that are on the line that may know the answer to that question, feel free to jump in.
All right, and there was another question in a similar vein that says, Wise County is going to lose 15% of its tax revenue. How will we fill the gap and help places that need to transition?
I will go with Adam. Of course, if you have something to say after this, please do. I think that's a really great question. And I think that's why we're here, is we're saying we need to get on that process of planning that, where that's going to come from. Part of the problem is that we can't make these preparations or make these plans if Dominion does not give us the information that we need. So now that we have this information, that's kind of what we're calling for, is for this plan to start being developed now. Because like, as I stated, like in 2055, we're expecting these coal power plants to sunset. But according to that report, right, it could happen a lot sooner and a lot quicker. So long answer to that is we don't have that answer yet, but we need to get on it.
Yeah, to build on what Tasha said, Wise County has already in and of itself, and with some assistance from the state, but not nearly as much as we need, has already started the transition away from the mono coal economy that we've been living under for a century. One of the problems we face in Appalachian Voices has been key in trying to work towards this problem is that we are almost entirely fossil fuel based on our energy production down here, even through AEP, which is Old Dominion Power, which is my energy producer. One of the things we run into is that we don't have enough renewables in our energy mix to even be considered for a site for outside companies to come in and help us diversify our economy, provide big, good paying jobs. And that outside companies is not the answer we're looking for. It is just a piece of the pie. So we need to push quickly towards that shift in our dependence on fossil fuel for our energy, just so that we can be even considered for our sites. I think it was a few years ago, Amazon or Google wanted to come in and put a big data center in Wise County, and they just didn't because we don't have the proper level of renewables in our system. So that's one piece that can help us make that transition. We need, and we just need to end the mono economy that we've been depending on. And hopefully by having this transparency and moving away from our dependence on fossil fuels, we can begin to look at what options are available to us coming forward.
I would add that we also, as we're doing more renewables, we need to look toward putting the facilities that are building those in the communities that are affected by this various infrastructure. And in fact, in Union Hill, in Buckingham, they've already started trying to do some of that as a result of what happened with the pipeline. And so as we talk to the people who are promoting solar and wind and other things, all of our communities that are hosting this fossil fuel infrastructure need to be in on what's coming next.
Thanks so much for those answers. We've got one more question from Eric. He says, it seems like it's a no-brainer to require coal companies to put tarps on the rail cars. Has any progress been made on that front?
Norfolk Southern, from what I understand, has not yet made a decision to cover their coal cars with tarps. The expense is one they don't want to go ahead and pay. What they have cited as doing is they have tried to change the method of how they, load the cars in order to produce less dust and spray a kind of adhesive material kind of on top of the coal cars as they're loaded to reduce the amount of dust that comes off when they're being loaded. You would think it'd be a simple thing to just say, okay, forget that. Let's just make a big tarp and put it on their coal cars. They're not the only company that's ever been required to do that in America. In fact, at least one company in California was taken to court over it. I do not know if Norfolk Southern is going to make that choice without being pushed into it. So progress is ongoing, but it's like I said, that's just part of the fight.
Thanks, Carl. I think the last question, unless any reporters want to unmute themselves and ask a question, we'll ask our storytellers, what's your vision for the future? What would real environmental justice look like for you and your community? And I'll let anyone jump in who wants to take that one.
I'll take a try at that. Environmental justice would, to me, look like us spreading the infrastructure across the areas that use it, and making sure that when we put the cost on communities of hosting these things, that they get some benefit from them. And, you know, these pipelines, the communities really aren't going to get anything for them. And we have historically looked at the people who have the least and just stuffed those things that people didn't want to live with in those communities. There's also a benefit to spreading these things out in that you'll get distributed generation, which would require fewer lines to be put up, and also help us from a security standpoint. It would be much harder for somebody to hurt our system. So that's my dream, is that it's spread out, and therefore we take care of everybody and their health, and put rules in there so that everybody is treated fairly.
I agree with that. And what environmental justice looks like to me is no more coal ash spills like what happened here in the city of Danville with Duke several years ago. Environmental justice is making sure that Black people and people of color aren't discriminated against because of their inability to pay utilities, or having to deal with unsafe conditions based on their zip code. Environmental justice looks like, you know, no uranium mining in Halifax County and Pennsylvania County. Environmental justice means that infrastructure stays intact in some of the poor communities. Hurricane Michael years ago kind of washed out our roads for nearly a year. So environmental justice is just, you know, protecting people. Again, it seems like some of the things, especially with the Norfolk Southern, with the coal, with the TARP, it seems like a very simple thing to do to protect people. It shouldn't take all of us on a Zoom call imploring our elected officials to do the right thing. So I think overall, environmental justice to me is people doing the right thing without these wonderful people having to share these stories. Hopefully we can illuminate some of these stories in the next General Assembly.
All right, well, thank you. Oh, Adam, did you want to add to that?
Sorry. Oh,
go
yeah,
ahead.
sorry. Yeah, well, one of the things I think of when I think of environmental justice, particularly in the context of our area, is the building up and the building out of opportunity. We don't really want, you know, we don't want everything handed to us. We don't want to have somebody from outside coming in and like saying, we have your solution for you, and here it is in a nice little package wrapped in a bow. We want to be able to control our future, control our lives, have not just have a say, but take the leading role in managing our land and reaping the benefits of that management, and having the benefits of brought or kept in our communities so that we can prosper together. And, you know, like our region has, our history in coal is just filled with exploitation of all kinds across the board, and ending that exploitation and making sure it doesn't have the ability to come back again, I think is vital to really having a just transition.
Thanks so much, Adam. If none of our other storytellers have anything to add, I will kick it back to Kenneth to wrap things up.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashley. So again, I want to take this opportunity for one, thanking each of you for joining us today. I know that there are several other things that you could be doing at this time. And so we greatly appreciate you joining us today, but also the continued advocacy work that many of you have been doing and continue to do in your communities. As I mentioned earlier, the Virginia General Assembly will begin the 2021 legislative session on January 13th. I provided a link in the chat box. It's lis.virginia.gov. On that website, you will find more information about when committees will be heard, the types of legislation that will be considered, but also if you want to know what pieces of legislation that your members are carrying, you can also see that there. So please feel free to follow any of our organizations online and join our email list, and we will continue to provide you all with information on how to continue to stay involved during the 2021 legislative session. So thank you all so much for your time today, and I hope each of you enjoy the rest of your evenings. Enjoy.